Hello, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented today by Meriwether and Tharp, and we are happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us today. Looking forward to welcoming Terrence on the show today, and looking forward to talking a lot with you about what's going on around UGA. Obviously, a lot of this, the aftermath of the news that we discussed yesterday, is a possibility, and now we discuss it as kind of an official thing that's happening. Wide receiver A.D. Mitchell is leaving the Dogs to go somewhere else, and we'll find out where that is in the transfer portal. And this brings up a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions on the part of Georgia fans. We're going to talk more about that on the show today, and we are going to use the words of a former Georgia coach to kind of springboard us into this discussion, because in one sense, something that Mark Richt said may seem like bad timing, but in actuality, it might be the kind of thing that ought to give some comfort to Dog fans. We'll talk more about what that is. As said before, we'll welcome in Terrence on the show today and kind of find out what he has to say about a lot of this, and we will just sort of see where it all goes. And we're glad to have you with us as we do it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. It's presented by Meriwether and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Meriwether and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
As the architect of Go for 2 in 22, it's going to be a little while here before I'm ready to start really doing a whole lot of Go for 3 in 23. We'll get there, I promise. I mean, that's obviously a mission for Georgia on the field for this upcoming season. But for now, I think it's more appropriate just to sort of appreciate what Georgia has and sort of bask in the glow of the mission being complete. Got to in 22, back-to-back Dog National Champions, as we say around here, the sign on the front of the desk, of course, as we typically do. So it's going to be a little while before we are quite ready to sort of fully turn the page yet to the idea of winning a third straight national championship. It is a very realistic possibility for Georgia. They'll be favored to do so. As Kirby Smart has told us before, though, probability isn't always reality, and so next season will have its own challenges and things like that. Well, eventually we'll get there on those. But for now, we're just sort of happy with the fact that Georgia's won 2 straight national championships. We're not quite ready to move off of that as of yet. However, the great former Georgia coach Mark Richt, who we all love, was a part of a radio interview here this week, or at least I heard it this week. I'm not sure when the radio interview took place. I'm assuming it was this week. And Richt did get into the topic of the notion of Georgia winning a third straight national championship. And so since he is talking about it, we are going to talk about it with him. Now, I'm going to tell you something about the clip you're about to hear. This is from like the ESPNU satellite radio show that you're going to hear on like ESPN, I should say Sirius XM. There is an element of what Mark Richt is about to say that may come to your ears to sound like bad timing in light of the big story that's out there with Georgia right now, the fact that A.D. Mitchell, the wide receiver, has entered the transfer portal. This may not seem like great timing to have Richt says what he says in light of the A.D. Mitchell news, but as we kind of dive deeper into this, I think Richt's words actually for Georgia fans ought to provide a certain degree of comfort. So let's use the words of Coach Richt here on the idea of Georgia winning a national championship again to kind of lead us into a discussion about A.D. Mitchell. This is Richt from Sirius XM Radio.
It'll be tough, but the one thing they have is, these great players and bringing in more great players on top of it. So just to get playing time, you better be ready to get after it every single day and take care of business and prove you deserve to start, prove you deserve to, playing time. And the thing that Georgia's got now was similar to what we had at Florida State. We had kids that would stay and be a little patient and not just bolt every time something wasn't going well, because they knew when their day came, they had a chance to have big numbers and big success and still get where they wanted to go, which was the NFL. So I think the guys at Georgia understand that they got to compete for everything they get, but they also know that in the end, they can certainly get where they want to go.
So that's Mark Richt saying, hey, the main thing that allows Georgia to come back and win a third straight national championship in 2023 is the idea they're so loaded with talent that they have just talent upon talent upon talent. It's hard to earn playing time there because of how deep the roster is. Then he goes on to make the comparison to the Florida State teams he was a part of when he was offensive coordinator prior to becoming Georgia head coach in 2001 of, you've got so much talent that's also willing to be patient. You may not play as much as you want to when you first get there, or you may not play as much as you want to throughout the entirety of your career, but you want to be a part of a great program. You want to have great success, and the way that Florida State was once attractive for guys to stay in the program Coach Richt says that's what Georgia is now, and that's why they have won, and that's why they have a very good chance of keeping on winning. Now, there are some people who hear Coach Richt say that and say, but Coach Richt, that's not true. What about A.D. Mitchell? A.D. Mitchell wasn't patient. A.D. Mitchell didn't want to stay. A.D. Mitchell seems like he's bolting, and he's using the mechanisms that are in place, like transfer portal and maybe NIL as an inducement to go into the transfer portal. A.D. Mitchell, one of Georgia's most important players, at least in terms of his big performances in big games, he's not showing that level of loyalty that you say that great programs have, that your Florida State team once had, that Georgia has had over the course of the last couple of years. A.D. Mitchell stands as an argument against all that. And obviously that seems to be sort of true. But if Richt were here right now, let me ask you this. Would he say, and I'm guessing he might say this, I'll certainly say this in place of him on this. Is the A.D. Mitchell story, and if you're not aware, we talked about this as a possibility yesterday, that Mitchell might go into the transfer portal. It seemed likely that he was, and by yesterday afternoon that had been official. Mitchell is leaving, and it seems like one of these kind of destabilizing stories that exist right now, where a player that has gained great fame at Georgia despite being hurt from time to time, a guy that's gained great fame, it's just boom, he's leaving, and maybe he's being bought by somebody else, kind of being stolen off the Georgia roster. Maybe that's what this is, kind of against what Rick said is the kind of patience that other players have shown at Georgia, or maybe the kind of patience that seems to exist with great players and great programs throughout history. And all of this has a way of sort of making Georgia fans maybe a little bit nervous. But let me ask you this, and I mean this in legitimate terms here. Is Mitchell the norm, or is Mitchell the exception? And I think what you'll come to draw the conclusion of is, well, it's not great that a guy like Mitchell is leaving. It's a little bit frustrating for the system that we're in, and the fact that Georgia's being asked to navigate this the same way that every other program is being asked to. When you look at the overall situation at Georgia, while the Mitchell situation is both irritating for those of us who like UGA, a little troubling for those of us who sort of value the future of the sport, you're not quite so sure how this impacts all of that. At Georgia right now, it is the exception and not the norm. That ultimately there are far more people at Georgia right now who kind of fall in line with what Coach Richt said right there, which is, hey, they are willing to be patient. They are willing to contribute. They are willing to be a part of something great, be a part of a cause that's larger than themselves. And A.D. Mitchell has chosen not to do that, but I don't think there's anybody who truly believes among our audience, among the media, among whatever else, that somehow Mitchell leaving Georgia is some sort of debilitating loss that will now remove Georgia as its status as the preseason number one team in the country and the most likely team of anybody in the nation to win next year's national championship. I don't think that should change your opinion on that. I'm assuming for most of you that it probably doesn't, because, as we said yesterday, while Mitchell's potential exit kind of means you don't get a chance to finish cheering for a guy you've been cheering for the entire time, when you look at what Georgia still has coming back from its pass-catching core for this upcoming season, I think you have a reason to be optimistic in a way that maybe a lot of years in the Coach Richt era you haven't had a chance to do that. It is not nothing that Ladd McConkey's choosing to return. Even if you thought he probably would, when you look at his overall statistical performance from the 2022 season, as we said yesterday, it's right there on par, if not better, than what a guy like George Pickens did in 2019. Pickens is kind of being thought to be one of these awesome NFL-type wide receiver bodies, and the kind of guy when he first arrived here, he sort of gave Georgia a glimpse of something it really hadn't had in the Smart era prior to that. And now a guy like McConkey is kind of giving you that same statistical profile, but he's just one of the players who's doing that for UGA. And his decision to return, I think, is made even more poignant in light of, go back to look at like 2017 and 2018. The guys that were kind of leaving and going to the NFL, trying their hand there, without like huge stats while they were at Georgia, but somehow I just sort of seen they were just kind of ready to move on, even if they haven't quite proven themselves at the college level. And in the case of McConkey, he's put up the kind of stat line that a lot of Georgia receivers in previous years would have sort of dreamed to be able to have, and yet he says, I'm ready to come back for Georgia and do more. And yet, ultimately, McConkey's not even the leading receiving yard guy who's returning from last year's team here for 2023. Brock Bowers is a guy that had 50 more yards in the national championship. He would have joined Terrence Edwards in the 1,000-yard club here at UGA, and he's coming back for his third year there as well. So not only do you bring back your top two receivers, you actually bring back, 3 of your top 5, at least as it stands right now. And that's a part of a Todd Monken system that seems to work really well with kind of whoever you have in place in that offense, and with a wide receivers coach in Brian McClendon that I think if you haven't fully taken time to appreciate what he's doing for Georgia, I think you ought to do that. And in fact, one of the most enjoyable things that I had happen for me during the national championship in Los Angeles was on that media day that we brought you some live video coverage of. I had a chance to have a little bit of an extended conversation with McClendon, and I came away very impressed. I mean, obviously we kind of knew some of this, but for me, I don't know that I fully consider this because I had a chance to talk to him. I came away really, really impressed with the energy and the passion that McClendon is bringing to that job right now. So much so that a guy like McClendon working with this position in an offense like Georgia's led by a guy like Todd Monken, that I sort of feel pretty good about the Georgia wide receiver room, whether A.D. Mitchell is in it or not. And deep down, I think most of you do there as well, even if you're irritated with the way that it all kind of went down. So Richt says the thing that makes Georgia Georgia is there are guys who are willing to stay here and be patient here and not necessarily get the kind of individual glory they might get somewhere else. And even in the light of A.D. Mitchell leaving, that's still true. So let me kind of transition away from the Richt part of this and kind of look more fully at the A.D. Mitchell part of this here for a moment as well, because like the one thing you can't deny, and we did some of this on video yesterday when the Mitchell news first broke, and it's sort of continued on social media since then. The one thing that you can't deny is that this has erupted kind of a great debate about how Georgia fans should feel about Mitchell. And you can just look at my own mentions and see people sort of diametrically pose on this of, you know, glad for the contribution he made to Georgia, the game-winning catch against Ohio State, the go-ahead catch in the national championship game in 2021 against Alabama, and other people who are just really, really frustrated with him that he's choosing to leave UGA. And it kind of brings up the notion of, and you've heard this debated, and some of you like this, some of you don't, but it's the kind of thing that's clearly top of mind for a lot of Georgia fans right now, the notion of, well, is A.D. Mitchell what we call a DGD? Is he a damn good dog? And that's just one of those things. I guess other programs have their own version of this. For Georgia fans, they've kind of had their version of this of, hey, who are the guys that you give a little bit of extra reverence to because of the contribution they made to Georgia? And the point that I said on Twitter yesterday, and maybe you agree with this, maybe you don't, is to me, there is a simple line of demarcation for what a DGD is. It's, while you were here, did you work to make Georgia a better place? And in the case of A.D. Mitchell, I think the answer to that question is clearly true. The success that he had in big games makes him the kind of person that you ought to be grateful for. Now, I'll also acknowledge this. Just because you're thankful for something doesn't mean you have to be happy about something. I mean, a lot of the things I've grown to be thankful for didn't necessarily make me happy in the moment. So in the case of the Mitchell thing here, I don't think that you have to apologize if you're a little frustrated by it. I mean, I'm a little bit angry about it too. But ultimately, my anger is sort of pointed more towards the system than Mitchell himself. I think it's silly that college football doesn't enforce its tampering rules more so than it does. It seems pretty obvious that Mitchell was likely tampered with here in this situation. Nobody seems to care about that. But if you want to be a sport, you have to have rules. You're only a sport to the extent that you do have rules. And I think that college football would do right by enforcing these rules a little bit more. But as I said, that sort of makes me a little more angry at the system than it does Mitchell for leveraging the system for his benefit. I think that Mitchell, in my mind, clearly rises above the level of what we can think of as a damn good dog, a DGD, because of the contribution that he made. And I'll go as far as say this. I don't necessarily think that the idea of a DGD should be all that exclusive of a club. Frankly, it should be kind of a large group of people. There are a lot of players that come through Georgia, I believe, that probably, sort of reach that level. Frankly, I think some of you sort of reach that level as well. Those of you who've been loyal to this program, you spent your money on this program, you attend games, you've donated. I think some of you rise to the level of being DGD. And I just don't think it should be that exclusive of a club so that the only people that are in there are like a small handful of players and a small handful of coaches. I think it should be a much more inclusive club than that, and I do think that Mitchell is the kind of guy that ought to be included. But if my words on this don't carry enough weight with you, let me let you hear Kirby Smart for a minute. Now, let me set this up. A lot of you may have missed this because it was the day after the national championship. It's that sort of like bleary-eyed press conference that takes place on Tuesday morning when all Georgia wants to do is get out of town and go home. It was in Indianapolis last year. It was right after the Stetson Bennett infamous Good Morning America interview. In L.A. here, that was even more true, even though it was at that time, obviously, it was noon Eastern when the press conference took place, but it was still 9 a.m. Local time where Georgia was. They're obviously tired. They're ready to go home. So in the midst of the press conference, this is like right at the beginning, actually, it was Zach Klein from Channel 2 that asked the question to Kirby Smart of, how quickly do you get back to the business of getting ready for 2023, and how much downtime do you allow yourself a chance to have? And in the midst of that, Smart started talking about being aware there were players from Georgia who were going to transfer. Now, I don't know how you personally feel about A.D. Mitchell and all this situation, but I want you to listen to what Kirby Smart said about players on this 2022 team that he knew was going to transfer and how grateful he was for the contribution they still chose to make for Georgia. Kirby's words ought to matter to you. This is Kirby, relevant here in light of the A.D. Mitchell news from last Tuesday.
I am concerned about our season, and next year I'll be thinking about that the entire flight home and things we can do right now. Like what's important now, right? WIN, that's our motto. And I know people think that's like unheard of, but you actually have to. There'll be time to take off. It's just not today because decisions are imminent. We have several players on our team who stuck it out. Like they didn't have to. They could have said, "I'm going in the portal." We had several guys that said, "Coach, I'd like to go in the portal. I'm going to go in the portal, but I want to win a national championship." And like that makes me want to cry because they did it for the team over themselves, and that makes me really proud. So that time is now for them because the portal is a real thing. It's a vehicle to go somewhere else where you can be successful. And we had some guys make sacrifices to do that. So I think that's pretty cool.
You better take Kirby Smart's word seriously there. Kirby Smart just told you that in 2022, turning into 2023, the transfer portal is a reality. And what Kirby Smart says is there is an unselfish way to transfer. And he said, it makes me want to cry the unselfish way in which Georgia players who knew they were leaving, the way in which they chose to do that. They stayed here. They didn't become a distraction. They contributed to winning. Now, I don't know if when Smart said that, he was thinking about A.D. Mitchell. Obviously, the rumors that Mitchell might transfer existed, far prior to Smart saying what he said. Maybe Mitchell was on his mind when he said that. We don't know that one way or another. But nonetheless, the Smart words there ought to carry a lot of weight. Knowing that guys are free to transfer, free to do what they want to do. Smart says there were some guys who made a team-first approach to their own decision to transfer. That doesn't matter to you. So ultimately, am I grateful for A.D. Mitchell's contribution to Georgia? Yes. Am I happy about the fact that he's leaving and the mechanism that's in place for him to do what he's doing right now? No, I'm not that happy about it. It makes me mad at the system more so than it makes me mad at Mitchell. Will I be rooting for Mitchell where he goes next? The honest truth is I probably won't. But that doesn't change the fact that what he did for Georgia was very, very, very important. Big catch against Ohio State. Big catch against Alabama. He's a part of this program's history. And for a long time to come, I'll look back on him as a guy that helped Georgia go for 2 in 22. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Meriwether and Tharp, and happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us today. Live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We're on the radio at noon, of course, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we are available as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just happy to have you with us no matter how you choose to join the program. We are very, very happy to have you on board with us. Also, a big thanks to our friends at Meriwether and Tharp for making all this possible, too. I still have not given Bob Tharp from Meriwether and Tharp his confetti. Actually, our producer, Michael Carvel, is expecting some from me there as well. Trust me, I've got bags and bags of confetti. I've got more confetti than anybody knows what to do with, so I'll be giving that out to some of our great sponsors and some of the folks who help us get on the air here each and every day there as well. But my reason for telling the story is because it just gives you a little bit of insight into what Bob and his wife Ashley and the entire sort of Meriwether and Tharp family are all about. These are big dog fans. These are folks who are like invested in UGA, traveling to LA, at the Peach Bowl there as well, and just wherever Georgia is, they're kind of going and following the Dogs. And I love having sponsors like our friends at Meriwether and Tharp who are so closely aligned with what we like and believe around here that Georgia winning is a good thing. And you better believe they're happy over there on that when that happens. And here's the part where the music sort of changes a little bit too, because while on the weekends they're having as much fun as anybody and living it up with Georgia football as much as all of us are, during the week, Bob and his staff there at Meriwether and Tharp are also working very hard on what for you might be a very challenging situation. And I just get it. It's real. Especially at the new year, it sort of seems like we're kind of aware of these type of things more, whether it's because you have it as a goal to finally get this cleared up in the new year, or maybe you've come off a holiday season where you realize that whatever dream you had of being able to hold on to a relationship, it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to be able to be kept in place. And I know how terrible that must be. I really, truly do. And I wish I could sort of wave a magic wand and take all that pain away from you. I can't necessarily do that. but I can give you the advice, put a strong advocate by your side as you get ready to maybe go through this. Someone like Meriwether and Tharp that understands the law, understanding how the law can be leveraged for your benefit, that is aware of intricacies with the law that someone like me just has no concept of whatsoever. That is what Meriwether and Tharp is all about. They are your source for Georgia divorce. You can find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. Set up a free initial consultation with one of their attorneys. Take advantage of the free resources they have, like blog posts and podcasts, things like that. Really kind of educate yourself kind of before you make that decision to hire Meriwether and Tharp to handle your divorce situation. You can do all that online. It's a great resource. Their website, theatlantadivorceteam.com. Find Meriwether and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce, there for a lot more on that. All right, we're going to talk to Terrence Edwards here coming up in a moment. There's a lot that we're going to get into with Terrence, both the good and the bad. We'll do that here coming up in just a bit. For now, though, let me go around the DawgHouse, and it's presented today by our friends at ServPro. And look, let me just kind of be very, very candid about this for a moment. Like, the one thing that we are not on DawgNation Daily is we're not a news show. What I mean by that is like there are a lot of things that are news that we don't really talk about. And there's a lot of things that we do talk about that's not really news. Like, this is not a news report. I've never really considered myself a journalist. What I mean by that is journalists wake up and they begin every day to say, what does our audience need to know? And I think that journalism is a very important job. I think it's very important to interact with journalists and kind of know what the news is. But around here, we sort of begin the day by saying, hey, what is a topic that's interesting and, when possible, fun for our audience to have? We're a little more, I guess, infotainment than anything else. That's just kind of the way we have kind of always approached our stuff around here. So I say all that to say this, is that there is something that's out there. I want you to know about it. And then after today, I just don't quite know how much more we're going to talk about this, because it just doesn't really fit the parameters of what we do on this show. Mark Weiser from the Athens Banner-Herald, I believe, was the first to report this, is that today the attorneys representing the family of Devin Willock are going to hold a press conference outside the courthouse. Let me just read from Mark here, who says, attorneys representing Devin Willock's family are going to call a press conference to discuss legal action. I believe that's slated to take place here today. Now, we're not lawyers, and whatever opinion I might have on any of this kind of stuff is just completely worthless, because I just don't know the law. This is not a legal beat type show. So we have tried our best, and we will continue to try our best to honor the life of Devin, to honor the life of Chandler, and we're going to take that really, really seriously. I thought the piece that Jeff Sentell up at DawgNation.com yesterday, looking a little bit more deeply as to who Chandler was, I thought that was really, really important. I think you ought to read that. I think you ought to continue reading things like that. And following this stuff may be important too, but it's just not our beat. It's just not the thing that we do as much. So I wanted you to be aware this is out there. You'll be able to read about what actually goes down with all of this at DawgNation.com. But in terms of every twist and turn this might take from here, that's just not our show. That's just not necessarily what we're going to do. It's probably important to follow, and there'll be plenty of folks who do follow that, and you can read that there from them. They may probably have more expertise in this area than we do. But for us, wanted you to be aware of it, and also want you to know that as you kind of move into this phase of all this, we'll probably talk a little bit less about that there at that point. So just wanted to kind of make you aware of all of that. And as this goes down, whatever the next thing is, you can read about it at DawgNation.com. But at least wanted you to be aware that's out there, and that's what's going on. That's also around the DawgHouse here today, presented by our friends at ServPro. Of course, you can find them online, servpro.com. That's spelled S-E-R-V, servpro.com. And when you've got some sort of issue, fire damage, water damage, the kinds of things. I mean, I have some family members who have been, dealing with one of these situations where all of a sudden, you've got this huge water intrusion problem, and it creates this huge issue, and it's this enormous cleanup. And you're kind of left to say, well, gosh, how do you get things back the way that they're supposed to be? Well, our friends at ServPro, that's what they are. They're restoration specialists. They can literally get whatever your situation is, fire damage, water damage, whatever it is, they can get it back like it never even happened. That's what ServPro is all about. Also, all of their franchises are independently owned and operated. What that means is when you do business with ServPro, you're doing business with someone who's got a stake in the outcome just like you do. In other words, they want a satisfactory outcome because that's their livelihood. That's what it depends on. Well, the same thing for you. If it's your home, if it's your business, you have just as much of a stake in an outcome for you. So our friends at ServPro, truly a name to know on all that. Find them online, servpro.com. That's S-E-R-V, servpro.com for a lot more on that. All right, before we're done on today's show, there was a very small piece of news yesterday that you might have missed, but I do think this has some importance for Georgia fans. We'll talk about that. There was some news in the SEC that in a roundabout way sort of ends up being bad news maybe for Florida. We'll get to that before we're done on the show today too, but on a wide-ranging number of topics right now, always a guy that we love having on the show. It is Terrence Edwards here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
I'm glad to have Terrence Edwards on the program here, DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. And Terrence, we love talking football with you, and obviously we enjoy the fun we're able to have with that. But as you are well aware, it has not been a fun time here at Georgia as of late. And I just want to give you a chance to kind of talk about Devin Willock and Chandler LaCroix. And I know a situation like this probably hits you, certainly maybe even harder than it hits a lot of us, because you know a lot of Georgia players personally, and you know how they are potentially touched by a situation like this. It has been a very confusing time for a lot of people, and it's very difficult to process, what we do, which is being happy about a Georgia team that's just won its second straight national championship, while also being deeply sad about what has gone on here with the events of Saturday night. So, Terrence, I just want to give you a chance to speak about that and kind of how this touches you as someone who has been involved in the UGA football community as you have been.
Yeah, I just, it's a sad time in Athens right now, and I have reached out to a couple of the staffers, talked to a couple of players, and they're hurting right now. This is both of the young people was very loved by everyone. Dev and Chandler as well was. So it's really not much you can say, but just continue to pray for their family and pray for healing, pray for understanding, and we all know that God don't make any mistakes. But as human beings, you just wonder why. So it's not really too much you can say about this tragedy. It's a tragedy. They're gone too soon. They're gone too soon. So I just say, man, just touch your loved ones and reach out to people that you probably haven't talked to lately. Just tell them you love them, and because you never know. Now, I was talking to someone the other day, and I'm close to. I'm just like, man, this game called life is very tricky, and none of us have the game plan to defeat it, because it's something that none of us know when it's going to be that time for us. So you just got to cherish the times that you have on this earth and enjoy it. And why be sad, man? I just see too many people just angry about stuff that's out of their control. And I don't live my life like that. I'm a very happy-go-lucky person, and I just try to enjoy every day that I have with my wife, my kids, my brothers, my sisters, my mom, my dad, my friends. So that's how I just try to live my life, and try not to let any of this negativity bring me down. Because why? Because a lot of things you can't control, and we're mad about situations we can't control. Just be happy, love life, love people around you.
No, I think that's really wise, Terrence. I do. And I guess one more thing I want to bring up, and then we can talk about something different. But you, I think, touched on something that I think is really important here. We're not really inside the Georgia program. I occasionally talk to a player or two, occasionally talk to a coach or two or something like that. But there is an inside feeling to the Georgia program that most of us are just not privy to. And I think it can be easy as time passes here to sort of assume that, things are just sort of getting back to normal. But there's going to be some invisible sadness and invisible wounds with this program that those of us on the outside are just not going to see. And those of us who, have taken it seriously about, kind of praying for these folks and things like that, it's important to remember that's a long-term deal here, that the way in which these coaches, these players, these staffers, these people that are part of this community, and they spend so much time around each other, there's an element in which, their ability to kind of move on from this, that this is going to be something they live with for a long time, and we may not see it from the outside. We may just see a team sort of getting back to the business of football, but on the inside the program, they're going to still be dealing with this in a very profound way, won't they?
Yes, most definitely. They're going to have to live with this for a long time. And can you truly get over this sadness? It's going to be hard. It's going to take time. It's going to have to heal from within, but also use as motivation while you're working out. Have Dev on your mind. What would he do in this situation? He's going to give you 110%. So go out and do something that he would do. Don't let his legacy be in vain. Go out and, we always try to find that extra motivation to continue our journey. And their journey right now is go out and do it for Dev and challenge and see what, the 2023 season could bring. You could really devote the next season to Dev and try to play in his honor and his name and everything that you do. Think about what he would do. Everything I've heard about the young man, I don't know him personally, but everything I've heard about the young man is a great young man. So I just hope this team, just everything that they do from now on, is in honor of that young man, especially on the football field.
There is no smooth way to transition back to a normal football conversation, but I do want to try to do that here for a moment because, Terrence, I think your voice on this matters. How are we supposed to feel about A.D. Mitchell leaving?
Do you want my perspective of the fan perspective?
I want your perspective. I want your perspective.
My perspective is I wish him well, and I sent him a message. Say I enjoyed these 2 years, and thank you for helping bring 2 national championships to University of Georgia, and go be great. That's what that's my exact words to him, man. And I just tweeted this. I can't be mad at a young man for trying to better himself. If that's what he feels is better than himself. From all accounts, he have a small child in Texas. If allegedly, and if he wants to be close to his child, who can fault the young man for that? Even if that's not the case. If there's something else out there that he feels that's better for him, by golly, go do it. One thing I do believe in, that Kirby is doing the best job of roster management. He's going to have guys ready to step up. I don't know this person, but I think we got the 2 best receivers in the portal. I don't know if that Kirby knew this was going to happen or just was trying to get the best players on his team. But if you go look at Ra Thomas and Love It, those 2 guys are going to bring an element to the game that's going to help us win. And I love It in the slot. He's very dynamic. I don't think we had this type of slot receiver probably since K-Mac.
Yeah.
So I believe that Kirby is going to bring the best roster together. And for AD, I just tweeted this. We all could be upset. We all could feel some type of way. But I just don't understand the disrespect that comes to these guys' ways. Like Jermaine last year, I understand he went to the rival and you could be upset, but just the disrespect crosses the line for me. And I just wish the young man well, and hopefully he finds peace in whatever that he believes that's true to him. And I'm ready for it to see Ra Thomas and Love It put on the red and black.
So I love having you on the show because I think you bring a really important perspective. You are a former player. You work with players. I would say that you bring kind of a pro player perspective that maybe someone like me can't really match. So I want to get more into this because I think your opinion really matters on this. So let me tell you how I feel, and you tell me if it's fair or not. I've said I believe that A.D. Mitchell is what we call a DGD. I mean, this is a guy that's contributed heavily to 2 Georgia national championships. I'm grateful for that. 20 years from now, when he comes back here as a part of like the ceremony like you guys have for the 2002 SEC champs this year, you better believe I'm going to stand up. I'm going to be clapping for him. Glad to see him. I can't root for him where he goes, though. Do you think that's fair?
That's very fair. That's very fair. I think for what he has done, for helping us bring back-to-back national championships to the University of Georgia, can't be taken away from the young man. When we have the 20-year reunion, he has to be celebrated. Now that he's not a part of the program anymore, you don't have to cheer for him. You don't have to wish bad on the young man, but you don't have to cheer for him. That's the thing about being a fan. You're a fan of the University of Georgia, and I just tweeted this. As much as I'm invested into the program, I'm invested into the program and not players, because players is going to leave. The University of Georgia is going to be here, and I'm, through my blood, sweat, and tears as a player, I'm invested into the University of Georgia, and I don't get, even the players that I've trained that came to Georgia and left, I'm not upset with them guys. I cheer for Georgia. That goes for Jermaine. That goes for Eric now leaving. That goes for Justin Robinson. I love those guys. But I'm cheering for the University of Georgia, and they all know that. I'm invested into this program and not players.
Okay, so let me go another level here. And as you said, Jermaine Burton's a guy that you're very close to. And I have to be honest with you about this, Terrence, is that I feel more negatively towards Burton for the fact that he left last year and went to Alabama. In the case of Mitchell, if he goes to Texas or if he goes to one of these places that's like, not, a team we expected Georgia to be playing because, frankly, Texas is not good enough to play Georgia. I mean, if he goes to a place like that, there's a level of, I guess, like negative energy that doesn't bring up for me because it just sort of seems like he's sort of out of sight, out of mind. In the case of Burton, I think a lot of folks assume when he left a year ago, that's a guy that Georgia would likely play, in that next season. As it turns out, Alabama wasn't good enough to make the playoff either. But that's a guy that you thought you'd be doing battle again. So even though that's your guy, I have to be very, very candid here for a moment, is that I'm a lot more, I guess, favorable in the view of how Mitchell is leaving Georgia right now than I was in the way that Burton left Georgia last year. Do you think that's fair?
That's fair. It's fair. I don't disagree with any kind of, say, bitterness or being salty about Jermaine going to Alabama. That's never my issue. He chose to go to Alabama. He understood what was going to come his way. Everyone can feel a certain way, but my issue comes when people are disrespectful towards the young man and his family. I've seen stuff where call them all type of B words and all this like that. Sports shouldn't go there. Yes, you could boo Jermaine and feel a certain way about him leaving University of Georgia going to Alabama. Yes, I have no issue with that. That is a team that we compete against. That's a team that we all thought probably would see them in the SEC championship game. I get it. But we all know when it's disrespectful. Yeah. We know when that line is crossed. And if you don't cross that line and you boo him and dislike him because he did, I'm all fine for that. That's what he signed up for. But I just don't understand the disrespect of players of going to somewhere that's going to better themselves in their mind, and you disrespect them and their families. That's the issue I have with everything.
And I think that one of the things that fans probably would do well to do is take a page from these coaches here a little bit, and you see this yourself because you're also a coach there too, is that coaches just don't get their feelings hurt very easily. If a guy chooses to go to another school instead of, my school as a recruit, it seems like the relationship oftentimes stays strong. And not just because, you may get him in the transfer portal, but it stays strong because relationships are ultimately what it's all about. And in the case of a Mitchell leaving here right now, we just played some audio of Kirby Smart a moment ago. He wasn't all that worked up about anybody. At least it seemed like transferring because he was just sort of thankful they stuck around and helped Georgia, win a national championship. That it seems like Kirby sort of made peace with the era that we're in. I think in a lot of ways, maybe a lot of us don't like the era that we're in, or at least certain parts about of it, but it is reality nonetheless. And it seems like Kirby is confronting reality, comfortable with reality, and the phrase that I used a little earlier is that from Smart's perspective, it sounds like there's an unselfish way to transfer. And it seems like Smart has celebrated the fact that a lot of the guys who've transferred from Georgia, even though they've kind of chosen to make a decision they think is going to better themselves, from Smart's perspective, at least based on what he said publicly, it sounds like he believes they've made sort of an unselfish pathway to ultimately make a decision that might better themselves.
Yes, I think so. I think just the time that we're in right now, as I stated before, I don't agree with the transfer portal and how it's currently established. I just don't understand it. Like Singletary, I think that's his name, the DB that's just been here for less than a year, and now you're transferring out. I saw a tweet that he tweeted like, "Know your worth." Like, that part right there just bothers me more than A.D. Mitchell or Jermaine transferring, because you haven't even gave this institution who you chose to come to a chance to develop you as a young man on and off the field, and you never know how your career is going to turn out if you stayed. So that part I just don't understand, but I think Kirby and company and all the coaches understand this is the time that we live in right now. We can't, Kirby can't sit here and complain about it, because if he complains about it, he's going to get left. I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine, Justin Miller, who's All-American Clemson DB, and I was asking, just saying, Dabo Swinney is probably the biggest person against the transfer portal, he's going to have to come around or he's going to get left behind. So I just think if the coaches does not come around and just accept the fact that this is a reality in college football and make the best of it, then you're going to get left behind. But, I mean, if you look at it right now, we got two of the best receivers out of the portal, and we lost one. So it's going to happen to every team. It's going to happen to us every year. But Georgia has established as one of the best programs in the league, and we're going to poach players from other teams that's going to want to come and be a part of this. So I'm just happy for the guys that's on the team, the guys that leave. I wish you well. Thank you for your service and what you've done for the university. Go be great where you at. I just cheer for the guys that want to be a Bulldog.
So let me finish on the positive note here. How big of a deal is it for UGA that a guy like Ladd McConkey's coming back? And beyond that, the idea that McConkey plus Bowers, the two leading receivers for Georgia this year, that's like 1,700 or so yards between the two of them coming back for next season. That level of returning production from just those two guys alone, how big of a deal is that?
It's a big deal having, especially from the standpoint of you're going to break in a new quarterback. Now just having veteran receivers there with Ladd and Brock, like those guys. And let's not forget Marcus is another guy that has played a lot of football and he's a guy that is going to help us. So we have a lot of returning firepower. And I sent one of my Florida Gator hometown friends this the other day. Brock had 63 catches for 949 yards. Lovett had 56 catches for 846 yards for Missouri. Ladd with 58 catches. And Raw 44 catches for 625. That is a lot of production in the SEC that we presume is going to be our top four receivers. So even with AD leaving, and I was one of the guys I think first looked at his film and thought he was going to be what he was for the University of Georgia. I still think he has a lot of talent. I still think he's probably the best receiver that we have. But we have a lot of production that we have coming back next year.
Terrence, it is always great to talk to you. I really appreciate that. I've seen you on social media. I know you guys have been back. You and Ron Veal kind of doing some of that bubble work. If folks want to get better this time of year, how can they get in touch with you, learn how to catch the football better, some quarterbacks who want to throw to some guys? How can these folks get in touch with you?
You can find Ron Veal and I on social media. You can find me at Terrence Edwards, Wide Receiver Academy on all platforms.
Hey, Terrence, I'm grateful for your words today. Very important guest to have on a day such as this. So thanks for sharing what you did.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I just think it's an important perspective. I mean, I'm going to sit here and because I am a fan, that's my background, I can't help but speak from the perspective of a fan. Now, hopefully, have a little bit of ability to kind of consider other perspectives, but ultimately you kind of end up leaning back into the perspective that you own. So that's one of the reasons why I bring in a guy like Terrence, who was a player, who works with players, who kind of has a little bit of a different perspective on that. And I think what he shares on that, and listen, I think it's very even-handed. I mean, Terrence will be the first to tell you that. He didn't like a lot of stuff about this transfer portal, NIL type stuff there as well. And yet at the same time, you can't always be angry for guys who want to take advantage of what's in place right now. That would be an attempt to sort of deny reality, and that's clearly not what the Georgia coaches are going to do. So I think those are wise words from Terrence Edwards. I really do. Now let's get ready to transition and go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. We had a really fun meeting yesterday, and that's not something I say a lot. I don't love meetings, but when you got folks from Royal Caribbean who were in the building yesterday, our good friend Robin from Royal Caribbean was here. Jessica Slater, the travel agent that you hear me talking about, she was here. We had a long meeting yesterday talking about how much fun it's going to be on board Independence of the Seas, April 24th to the 28th, leaving from Port Canaveral, going to Nassau in the Bahamas, going to Perfect Day Coco Cay for that second ever cruise with DawgNation. Now, it's also one of those deals of this really is like the last call for the rooms. They are about to be just boom. It's about to be done. It's about to be over and done with. And in fact, we were kind of going through the list of people who had signed up, but hadn't quite fully finished their paperwork and things like that. We just started calling people out right there. So for some of you who've been on the fence about this and you haven't quite finished your paperwork yet, you may hear from somebody in DawgNation saying, "Hey, we need you on board." We did that to somebody yesterday. That's a true story, and we got all that squared away. And so We're getting it locked in. It's going to be a great time. We were actually talking about some of the special DawgNation events we're going to do, and I just can't wait. Like, one of the things we know we're doing is that big draft party. The first round of the NFL draft is the final night of the cruise, so we're kind of getting locked in on that. But beyond that, you've just got so many special DawgNation things that we're going to be doing. It's just going to be such an unbelievable time, and I can't wait to have you all on board. So if you're going to be on board, just know this. You're going to be hearing from us soon. We're going to be having a lot of kind of like meetings where we kind of talk about all the fun stuff that's going to be going on. We're going to have some special get-togethers on that. But if you've heard me talking about it, you haven't done anything yet, you sort of feel like you got time, you're out of time. It's like the sand has gone through the hourglass. It is. If you've heard this and you've been kind of dragging your feet, get on board. Let's get this done. It's time to do it. So call Jessica, 770-718-9147, 770-718-9147, or visit royaldogs.com. That's the website she's put together, royaldogs.com. It is time to lock in and be there, be ready to go on the second ever cruise with DawgNation. We can't wait to see you this April on board Independence of the Seas. All right, let's talk a little bit about some cruising around the SEC topics here just for a moment. And I have to be really honest about something for a moment. A lot of you know this, and I think most of you are kind of in the same boat with me. Sam Pittman, the Arkansas coach, is a guy that I just really openly cheer for. I mean, I love Pittman, so enjoyed his time here at Georgia. It has been fun to see him have some early success at Arkansas. In addition to the fact that I'm, I guess a certain sense of loyalty to Pittman because of what he did here at Georgia, there's also a sense in which I kind of like the idea of sort of fun-loving coaches having success, because it'd be kind of nice to have, that element of personality in the world of coaching, that football is just more fun with a guy like Pittman being a head coach. And so there's also an element of that's why I cheer for Sam Pittman here too. And so I come from a place of bias when it comes to Sam Pittman. I want him to succeed. I cheer for him to succeed. I probably cheer for Arkansas to win games more so than I have any other SEC program, obviously, other than Georgia in my entire life. I just like Pittman a lot. And like Georgia and Arkansas don't have very many conflicting interests, so therefore it's sort of fun to cheer for Arkansas because they're like way, way, way far away from here. And so Arkansas is just a team that I've kind of followed since Pittman's become head coach there. So all of that said, it's simply a setup to say this. I think this is a very important year coming up for Sam Pittman. He has had some success, but at a certain point, you got to take it to that next place. That's just the way it is in the SEC, Arkansas included. And I think that Pittman's going to be asked to do some things this year with a challenge that he has not had at any point in time prior to this there in Fayetteville. He's going to have two brand new coordinators. You may have heard that Kendall Briles, who had been with Arkansas as its offensive coordinator since Pittman was hired in 2020, has left Arkansas to go be offensive coordinator at TCU in light of the fact that Garrett Riley left TCU to go to Clemson. So he's had Briles in place. I do think that Briles is one of the top play callers in the SEC. I have thought that. And now you're replacing him. The guy they're bringing in is a guy named Dan Enos. Now, Enos is somebody that's very close with Pittman. You may remember this, is that when Georgia hired Pittman as its offensive line coach for the 2016 season, and they were looking for an offensive coordinator that kind of worked well with Pittman, one of the first names that Georgia went after at the time was Dan Enos. And at the time, I think that Dan Enos was a really good offensive coordinator. I mean, kind of relative to pace of play, those Arkansas offenses were actually not bad from a statistical profile, even though they just didn't play very fast. But Enos, I think, was a pretty good offensive coordinator. He had been, I believe, Central Michigan head coach and left the Chippewas to come be an offensive coordinator there for Arkansas and had some success doing that. I think since then he's probably kind of fallen some hard times. He was with Alabama for a little while. I guess he was at Miami. That didn't go well at all, I don't think. He's been with Mike Loxley at Maryland lately, but his coaching profile is not what it once was. So now he's going to be stepping back into a role that he's been in before, Arkansas offensive coordinator, and I think he's got big shoes to fill when it comes to Kendall Briles, who's now no longer there. I'd say the same thing is true on the defensive side of there as well. Travis Williams has been hired to replace Barry Odom. Now, I got to tell you, I grew not to really like Barry Odom as a defensive coordinator too much. I just thought the Arkansas defense was just too soft. And I sort of blame the style that Odom was using as part of that. They also didn't have great talent, maybe. But I just sort of grew to sort of feel like that the Arkansas defense was just too soft. So Odom is UNLV head coach now. Travis Williams is in place right there. So in what I think is actually a pretty big year for Pittman, where you got to show some results, he's going to be asked to do that with two brand new coordinators. Dan Enos, who probably has a lower profile than what Kendall Briles has right now. Travis Williams, who I'd say certainly, even though I think he's kind of a respected coach, certainly a pretty good recruiter, has just a lower profile overall than what Barry Odom probably had before that. So big year for Sam Pittman, the challenge of 2 new coordinators. For those of you who like Pittman and kind of have followed the Hawks because of him, that's probably a story worth following. Then there's this, Walker Howard, former, this is top 5 quarterback from the class of 2022, had been at LSU, has announced that he announced the other day he was transferred from LSU. Now we know he's going to Ole Miss. Now, this is kind of interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think it's a statement about what LSU does have at quarterback, and at a certain point, we're going to get more into the LSU thing for the upcoming season, because I would say I'm starting to buy into a little bit more that in 2023, LSU could take the next step under Brian Kelly and be not just a team that wins, but is probably kind of a down SEC West, but a team that wins the SEC West and has a legitimate chance of kind of being a playoff contender. I'm starting to buy in a little bit more to LSU for this upcoming season. And one of the things, and it's been a while since we've done this in college football, but one of the things I do think would be interesting is the notion that LSU could do so with a 2-quarterback system. Because the answer to this, I just don't know that Jaden Daniels is that great of a quarterback. But the combination of Daniels' athleticism plus Garrett Nussmeier, who I think most of would say, well, it's not going to have the SEC championship. He certainly proved to be able to throw the football pretty well. Understanding all of that, I think LSU right now sort of has 2 pretty good quarterbacks. In fact, let's do this as sort of a hot take, and maybe this is wrong, but I'm going to say it anyway. Does LSU have 2 quarterbacks better than anything that Alabama has? Might be worth considering. So the point is, when a guy like Howard leaves, it's because you see what's obviously ahead of you there at LSU. You feel discouraged by that. But here's the other thing that makes the Howard decision interesting. Leaving LSU, going to Ole Miss. One of the places that Howard could have gone was Florida, and he didn't do it. Now, we've already told you this week that Jaden Rashada has gotten out of his letter of intent, or at least he's seeking to get out of his letter of intent. He's not going to be at Florida. A potential transfer like this, not going to be there either. The transfer window is done now. There are still quarterbacks in there. All you had to do is enter the portal. You don't have to announce your home. But when you see what's there, I think you're left to believe here that Florida is going to go into spring practice with a quarterback competition between Jack Miller and Graham Mertz. And one of those 2 guys will exit the spring as the odds-on favorite to be Florida's starting quarterback next season. And folks, that is not the kind of thing that are going to get Gators fans very excited. And when you start getting into some of these projections, we're probably a few weeks away, actually a little bit more than that, or a couple of months away from our first over-unders. Florida's going to be projected to have a losing season again, especially if a guy like Mertz or Miller ends up being their starting quarterback, and there is no obvious replacement for them anywhere in the transfer world, at least right now, because anybody else that you're getting is someone that doesn't enter until May. You're going to turn that around quickly and make that guy your starting quarterback? The situation in Florida right now is a mess. It is a mess. It is Mertz versus Miller to be Sunbelt Billy's next starting quarterback, and I think you see now why they call him Sunbelt Billy. So pay attention to that. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, I want to get back to Georgia here in a moment and give you a little bit of a note on the Dogs. It may seem like a small thing, but it's probably more worth your attention you might realize. Before that, though, I do want to give a shout out to our friends at Marlowe's Tavern. Now, Marlowe's Tavern gives you the insider update every week with our buddy John Stinchcomb, but also Marlowe's Tavern gives you a great opportunity to become a member of the Insider Club there. And when you sign up for that, you're going to get a great incentive just for signing up. You're going to get $10 off, $30 just for doing that. Then once you become a member of the club, you earn what they call qualified visits each time you go. And a qualified visit is when you spend at least $15. Now, after you complete 4 qualified visits, you're going to receive a complimentary entree reward up to $20 on your next visit. So they essentially reward you for the stuff that you already love doing, which is enjoying the chef-inspired food and the craft cocktails with our friends there at Marlowe's Tavern. Now, there's no cost to do this. All you got to do is just go online. They'll even give you a special offer for your birthday and things like that. So it's marlowestavern.com for more on this. marlowestavern.com for more on this, and you can become a member of the Marlowe's Tavern Insider Club. All right. So a final note here for a moment. Eddie Gordon is a name that some of you know well, some of you may not know, but for a long time, Gordon has been a quality control staffer working with the offensive line. Basically, he's been like the top lieutenant to whoever the offensive line coach has been. It was Sam Pittman at one point in time, obviously Matt Luke, most recently Stacey Searles. But in the case of Gordon, he has been very important to Georgia's offensive line recruiting efforts over the years. This is a guy that has a great relationship with a lot of the players at Georgia. If you go look at the story that Connor Riley wrote yesterday at DawgNation.com, Gordon was a guy that Senator Von Prong Granger shouted out in the immediate aftermath of the national championship. Gordon's a guy that's been pretty close to a lot of these offensive linemen. I did want to make you aware. I'll show you this here on the screen here for a moment. Guys like this, you just don't keep. I mean, Georgia's been lucky enough to keep Gordon for a while, but guys like this, you just don't keep forever. And so Eddie Gordon says on Twitter, I got a new profile pic. It is the UAB Blazer. He's going to be a part of Trent Dilfer's first staff there at UAB. Now, I think that Dilfer is a pretty interesting hire there for the Blazers. I do. This is a guy that's been a high school coach and obviously, involved in the Elite 11. He's got kind of access to players in some respects. Clearly the kind of guy that'll be a pretty effective spokesman for the team, just given his ties to media and things like that. And I'd say that in the early stages here of his first administration, Dilfer doing a pretty good job of making hires there too. So this is one of those deals that, you have to be pretty deep in the weeds to sort of really know a ton about, quality control staffers working with Georgia's offensive line. But Gordon leaving to go be an on-field coach there at UAB, you better believe this is the kind of thing they will be noticing inside that program there as well. And this is a huge part of Georgia's success. I think I've said this before. Like the one thing that Kirby Smart has done a great job of, or I shouldn't say he's done a great job, it's just a thing. It's just kind of the way it's played out, is that the way in which Kirby's cultivated success at Georgia has caused all of us to pay attention to every aspect of the program. Your off-field guys, your quality control analysts, your preferred walk-ons, your recruiting staff, all of the elements that sort of make the program what it is that Kirby's success has made us realize that everything counts and everything matters. In the case of a guy like Gordon, he's been pretty important from Georgia on a recruiting standpoint when it comes to the offensive line. He's moving on. We obviously wish him well. And who knows how you may hear his name again, maybe some point in time in the future. But listen, the kinds of guys you want working for your program are upwardly mobile dudes. They want to take that next step professionally speaking, and so Gordon getting a chance to do that, wanted to make sure you were aware of that. And with that said, we'll get ready to wrap up the show. We're going to do a golden shoe here for the first time in a little while. So I wanted to bring back the golden shoe here today. We like to try to have fun when we can, and so wanted to try to kind of do that a little bit. I'll tell you a quick story. So my son is in the 5th grade. His teacher the other day came to me and said, I saw you on, oh no, she told Charlie this, and Charlie told me. She goes, I saw your dad on TV. And I thought she was talking about the regular show. Some people watch the show on their TV. And so I was like, oh, well, tell her I said thank you for watching. Come to find out, that's not what she meant. Come to find out, she actually did see me on TV. And I got to tell you, it's a little bit horrifying. So apparently one of the local news stations, and I can't tell which one that is just from looking at what you might call, I believe in the industry, we call that a chyron. We call them lower thirds. I can't tell which station this is, but apparently they just did a shot of like random Georgia fan in the airport going to Los Angeles. Happens to be me. I believe I have my driver's license in my hand. Don't zoom in on too much. I look terrible. Like, do you know how scary this is? I just look beaten up, as many people in the airport sort of do. Do you know how scary that is, just to sort of think that TV camera capturing you as you're walking through the airport? Now, I do have the Go for 2 and 22 shirt on, so I at least feel pretty good about that. But a little bit of a drive-by TV appearance for me that I was not aware of. My son's teacher made me aware of this, so I guess I'll give a golden shoe out for that here today. And by the way, reminding you of the lousy, stinking Gators, we talked about them a little earlier. Boy, it is not good news. We're on the Florida front here these days, and 282 days from right now, Georgia back, beating them up on them again. And we'll, of course, see you tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. So we're appreciative of them for being a part of the program and glad to have you here as well. We'll take a few of your comments, and we will get ready to roll on after that. All right. Okay, so here we go. So Byron Leftwich is out. Now, isn't there a chance that Todd Bowles gets fired too, or is that not going to happen? Obviously, Todd Bowles is the father of Troy Bowles, who's a Georgia linebacker signee. But so this is Ian Rappaport here on Twitter saying, for the first time, Bucs coach Todd Bowles will assemble his own offensive staff. Per me and Mike Garofalo, I always mispronounce his name. One name to watch as offensive coordinator is Todd Monken. He's been play caller there in 2018. Bucks had a very good offense when he was there. So this is Rappaport, Garofalo to go along with Jeremy Fowler. So it seems like for right now, the Monken thing to the NFL is at least a little bit real. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to go. Doesn't mean he wants to go. It could be that he wants to be in the mix for these jobs so he can get $3 million from Georgia as opposed to just the $2 million. I mean, it is not always obvious what the insertion into a rumor mill necessarily means, but this is – I'll give you, for instance. Last year when there was this brief rumor that Monken might go be LSU's offensive coordinator, to my memory, that was one source one time. That was Football Scoop, I believe, that had that. And we talked about it, but in terms of being echoed by anybody else, I believe that was just the one source one time. So you can be left to conclude, well, how real was that if it wasn't the kind of thing that everybody was talking about? And to my memory, that was just the one website the one time. Well, this is Rap Sheet obviously is a big deal in the NFL. Garofalo, kind of a big deal in the NFL. Jeremy Fowler's a respected guy for ESPN. So you've got three pretty prominent voices who are mentioning Monken here. And now, as I said, just because they're mentioning him doesn't mean that he's looking to leave, doesn't even mean that he will leave. There's 1,000 reasons why sometimes, this kind of stuff goes on behind the scenes. It could be that Monken just wants the attention. But we also suggested, hey, for a long time it seems like Todd was having the kind of success that should be earning him more attention than he was getting. Well, once you score 65 points in a national championship game, people are paying attention. So I guess that's worth watching. So there you go. Thank you to Michael for showing that to us. Mid-'80s Dog says a school accepting a player from the transfer portal ought to be required to reimburse the player's former school for medical expenses incurred rehabbing injuries. I get the idea that it makes you angry. I really, really do. I get the idea of that. But I do think there's a certain extent in which everybody should just appreciate the fact that, hey, when we heard about all of this coming, it's going to get wild, transfer portal, NIL, all that kind of stuff. I think a lot of folks envision that schools like Georgia were going to have their entire stability threatened, their foundation completely threatened, because all of a sudden now people would just be doing this all the time. And I don't think that you should allow the fact that Mitchell leaves in kind of frustrating fashion. I mean, it's human nature to be a little frustrated by that. But I don't think you should lose sight of the fact that Georgia has continued to thrive throughout all of this. And I think the way in which Georgia's continued to thrive is by not complaining about what is, but just leveraging it. That Georgia has found a way to exist in this current new world in which we live in. And I really don't think that you should lose sight of that. That at a certain point, you just sort of have to make peace with what is and talk about, well, how do you succeed in light of what's going on? And pretty clearly, that's what Georgia's doing. It just is. Baker in Texas asking about Cedric Von Braun Granger. I would say by tomorrow we hear about this, because by tomorrow, what is today's date? The NFL is going to announce this tomorrow, right? So, I mean, I think the understanding we had is that you had a deadline to put your name in the NFL draft deal. What was it? Monday, I guess it would have been. And then you had 3 days to decide to take it out if you want to. I think the thought here was that for someone like Cedric Von Braun Granger, who was so clearly close to Devin Willock, that out of respect for that situation, this would not be announced anytime soon. Now, does that mean, well, he had made the decision, just didn't want to announce it, or has he been deliberating the decision? I won't say about that necessarily one way or another, other than to speculate that I'm assuming he's probably leaving. I think it's more likely that he leaves than stays. And I guess by tomorrow, the entire list will be made public, and we'll at least know by tomorrow. But the reason why there's been no announcement one way or another has been because of obviously what's been going on at Georgia and what's been going on with a friend of Van Pron's in particular, and that's why we haven't heard anything there yet on that. And so, I would say it could come out any time, and I would say the odds are more likely that he leaves than stays. Don Jones giving a shout out to Charlie's teacher. Yeah, there you go. Johnny Surf Dog says, don't buy a player's jersey anymore. Those days are over because they'll transfer out the next year or the next week. I mean, I guess, but I mean, you watch the Peach Bowl right now. Are you any less happy about the touchdown scored because it got scored by a guy that that left? I mean, isn't this what professional sports have been kind of for some time now? And I'm not saying you shouldn't have feelings about it. I mean, I've got feelings about it too. I think there are some people that would love nothing more than to see, college football erode, and they use things like this as a lever to kind of get some of that. I mean, trust me, my antenna is up on all of this kind of stuff. Trust me, I promise you. But I am no less happy about the touchdown against Alabama, the touchdown against Ohio State. I'm really not. And, maybe this is just as simple as saying Georgia's won 2 straight national championships. It's hard to make me upset, mad about anything. But I can't get to the same level of anger that some of y'all get to on this. And it's not my place to tell you that you're wrong. This is one of those things that I think that reasonable people can have a slightly different point of view on. But if you would have told me, we had this about 2 years now. If you'd have told me 2 years ago that this is how Georgia would be kind of navigating the transfer portal, I would have said this is actually way better than I assumed it would be. Y'all, Georgia's got a very talented roster. You don't think there are people reaching out to Georgia players all the time? The fact that Georgia hasn't lost any more than it has, that's awesome. I mean, honestly, I think that's incredible. I do. I do. I think that Georgia is actually exceeding whatever expectation I had in terms of how well it could manage this sort of new NIL, pay-for-play era, transfer, I think that Georgia's actually handling this really well. I've actually been pretty impressed with the overall mettle of a good number of these players. In the case of Amarius Mims, Amarius Mims had the whole world thrown at him last year by Florida State. At the end, said, I don't want to do it. I'm going to stay at Georgia. And he came back to Georgia, and he was not an immediate starter. He was playing some, but he was not an immediate starter. And then when Warren McClendon got hurt, Amarius Mims stepped in. Do you win a national championship this year without Amarius Mims? I don't know. I think it'd be hard. If McClendon was not able to play and you didn't have a guy like Mims you could substitute in, which I think some of these Pro Football Focuses whatever have said that he graded out about as high as anybody, I believe. If you don't have a Mims, you may not win the national championship. That's a recruiting battle for a potential transfer that you want. So I think it's actually all working out pretty well for Georgia. You're not going to bat 1,000 these days, but I think it's all working out pretty well. Randy Hall asked about who the next center might be. I honestly don't know. That is one of those things where I gotta dig in on that a little bit. I don't know that I have a great answer on that. Let's see what else. Spencer Clark on YouTube says Amarius Mims was huge for Georgia. He was. That's huge. Like, to have a guy like that as your backup offensive tackle is crazy. And that's the kind of thing that a lot of folks were hoping teams like Georgia wouldn't have anymore. They thought these upstart teams like Florida State would come in and steal all that depth and just simply promise the world immediate playing time, NIL this, pies the sky, magical thinking. And a guy like Mims saw through it. You got to give him credit for that. Jonathan Aaron says, I hope nothing but the best for AD. With that said, with Bowers doing what he did the last 2 years, plus Ladd coming back, everything else we have, who will be the next 1,000-yard receiver? My money was on Bowers last year. My money will still be on Bowers this year. I just think he's that special of a player. But, could McConkey also give it a run too? There is a chance that's the case. There is. For sure. Zebulon Owen shouting out Gunnar Stockton. Excited about that. Cretaceous Williams says, or Courteous says, I want the team to three-peat and make history, and to do that, I believe you need as many returning starters as possible, especially starters with first-round NFL talent. Well, I don't deny that it would be way easier on Georgia if a guy like Mitchell was returning. I don't deny that. I don't deny that. Thomas Deuce says, how much better can the wide receivers be for Georgia next season? I mean, given what you're bringing in out of the transfer portal, just given the fact those are guys that have produced in the SEC, that they may not both, Ra and Dominic, they may not both be great for you, but just given the fact they produce in the SEC, given the fact that Georgia brings back its top 2 pass catchers in this past year, this is the best crop of returning talent Georgia's ever had under Kirby Smart, right? Am I right about that? I mean, you're obviously losing Darnell, and you're losing Kenny McIntosh, a weapon for you in the passing game, and you're losing some things like that. At least I think you're losing McIntosh. But I mean, you bring back kind of more than we've kind of sometimes seen Georgia doing there in that situation. Randy Payne says, bring me some confetti on the DawgNation cruise. Randy, we may try to do that. Andrew Hughes says, will Vandy be a better team than Florida, and why does that make me happy? Oh, Andrew, that'd make me very happy. That would make me very happy. DMart42 says, what were your thoughts on Vandergrift getting Heisman odds and not back? So is that true? I mean, we are at the stage when the first Heisman odds come out. I don't put much into that because you can't really – very early bets have very low limits, which means that the sports books don't have a whole lot of confidence in their prediction on this. Let me see if I can do this real quick, because I did see something online about this. I assume that all the quarterbacks probably had Heisman odds. But if it is Vandegrift and not Beck, then I think that just sort of speaks to how uninformed some of these early Heisman odds are. The sports books sort of know they're uninformed, and that therefore they don't take huge bets on. Like if you walked in Mattress Mac style and tried to try to get a big $100,000 bet on a Heisman odd at one of these sports books, they probably wouldn't take it. I also can't find this right now. Let's see if I can do this. All right, let's see. It's hard to go to one of these things that's not super spammy, but I'll try to look at this and try to find out more on this, because I had seen something about that, but I wasn't sure what I'd seen. So I'll look at that and try to figure that out. Jerry Dogfan says, what week does the NCAA trade deadline kick in? Hey, you laugh. There's some people who want that. You laugh. There are some people who want the portal window to open before the season ends. So I guess to a certain extent, I'm just sort of glad that's not what we have right now. But there are absolutely people who want that. Absolutely there are people who want that. Your plug, excited about the future of Branson Robinson. I'd agree with that. Somebody mentioned Warren Erickson. Erickson's also moving on there as well. So Erickson's the guy that's kind of moving on here. I mean, I think we're still in the midst of, kind of figuring out everything. But Erickson did declare that he's leaving. DawgNation story from 4 days ago. Erickson on Twitter. He has officially entered the NFL draft. So Erickson has declared on that already. Let's see what else. Andrew Hughes says, will we wear black jerseys next year and will we have a night home game? Unfortunately, I think you know the more likely answer to both of those questions. I did see this the other day, that of the highest rated teams in college football this year, right there near the top, I forget who number one was, but right there near the top were both Michigan and Georgia. It was the highest rated teams on TV in college football. And they were also teams, I want to say they both played at least 7-day games. Just kind of funny to think, Michigan and Georgia very similar in the fact they had huge TV audiences, way more than even Notre Dame and teams like that you typically think of as big business on TV. Georgia and Michigan were essentially the two biggest business teams on TV here this year, and yet they were playing the overwhelming majority of their games during the daytime. And for Georgia at home, all of their games during the daytime. Wally Smith says we'll be fine with our receivers next year. I, for the most part, feel like that's true. Frank Patterson says, other than Mims and Tate, who else do we have returning our offensive line? Yeah, so I don't mind telling you this, is that it has always been the biggest open question for me about Georgia this upcoming season is what's going to happen along the offensive line. And I hate to say it like this, but it's just a fact. Because of what has happened with the situation with Devin, it's almost like I can't even talk about it right now. To me, it's the biggest, from just a sort of football standpoint. Hey, Georgia had a lot of interesting questions to be answered by the offensive line. And it just seems like too soon for me to get into that right now because of now what has happened with Devin. It just really does. But just from a straight football conversation, there's a lot to be answered about Georgia's offensive line, a lot to be answered. Even if you feel pretty good about your two tackles, moving a guy like Mims maybe over to the left side, promoting a guy like Green to your starter, the fact that, Monroe Freeling got bumped up to a 5-star at on 3. Maybe you feel pretty good about him as a backup. You're still talking about a lot of guys that tackle spot they really haven't played a ton yet. And so it was going to be a big topic, and it will be a big topic, but it just seems a little early to have that right now in light of what's going on. Somebody asked about transfers and academics. Where'd this question go? Because I think this is important. Who asked this? I don't see it now. But somebody asked about transfers and academics. The academic part of this actually matters more than you might think. I think I have it on pretty good word, not necessarily Georgia guys, but across college football. There are a couple of pretty high-profile transfers that ended up not transferring, and because of academics was the reason why. That it's just kind of hard to transfer if you don't have your academics all lined up. And it's sort of one thing to sort of stay at the school you are. It's another thing to get accepted into the school that you're trying to go to. And so in some cases, especially with quarterbacks, it seems like. In some of this case, transcripts are just a little bit of a mess. And so that is a huge factor in this transfer conversation sometimes, is you do have to be accepted into the school that you go to. And, historically, there are some schools that just don't take a ton of transfers. Like I'm talking about academically, they won't take a ton of transfers. A lot of the Pac-12 schools have been that way. Colorado was that way kind of prior to Deion Sanders, but I think that Deion has obviously pushed and negotiated for that to change. But there are a lot of schools that just don't take a ton of transfers, and they just don't. That's just not the profile they want. And there are a lot of players that have to have sort of a basic, academic requirement to be able to do that, and they just can't. I mean, it's one of the reasons why guys kind of rush to try to graduate sometimes is because they know that when it is time for them to transfer, they can kind of like have the academic part sort of cleaned up, or the other thing that you can kind of do is, and I've heard a little bit of talk about this too, which is that you can come very close to graduating and not. You get your free one-time transfer, then you graduate, become a graduate transfer, then you can transfer again. Now, the point of all that, though, is like I'm not even sure the one-time transfer rule is even a thing anymore. I mean, it's clearly the rule that it's stated, but I'm not even sure that people are even really paying that much attention to that. But, you kind of get a sense of a little bit about why. To go back to what somebody asked earlier, is the academic part of this, even though it seems like we don't ever talk about academics in college football anymore, when it comes to transferring, there is a little bit of an academic component to that. There really is. Let's see what else. Curtis Williams says, biggest question for me is who replaces Nolan Smith, Chris Smith, Stetson Bennett from a leadership perspective. Those are very important questions. Very important questions. JC says they're going to make Stetson statue with him doing the mic drop or him on the phone. That's very funny. Very funny. All right, let me go to Facebook for a moment. After that, we got to get ready to get off. All right. On Facebook, we'll do a few comments, and then we'll get ready to move after that. All right. On Facebook. Michael O'Neill says, how about 2,000-yard receivers? I'd be right there for that, Michael. I love it. Johnny Prescott, thanks for the kind words. I really appreciate that. That means a lot to me. It does. It means a lot, Johnny. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Let's see what else. I mean, people talking about what might happen at Georgia offensive coordinator if Monken were to move on. It's probably still a little early on that. I mean, it's probably way early on that. But, clearly, look, Todd Monken is a very important part of Georgia's success. I'm not going to deny that. Gregory Nowak asking about Xavier Truss. I don't believe we know that yet on Truss. That's another one of those guys we're waiting to hear more about. Let's see what else. Miriam Corbett hoping for a night game next year. Maybe they'll get one. AJ Ferraro says, how much value is there in attrition through the portal? Kind of thing that having guys move on, NFL or portal, helps to sell early playing time to incoming freshmen. It's the kind of part of this that is not always maybe the most pleasant for everybody to think of, but it is certainly true, which is that you do want guys cycling through your program pretty quick. Like if you had your perfect way, you'd have a guy come in as a freshman, he'd develop a little bit. As a sophomore, he'd contribute. As a junior, he'd dominate, and then he'd leave. And, that's kind of what you want, because I think the hardest thing to sell to recruits is the notion that there's this like log jam, this sort of glut of guys at a position, and you're just going to come here and just sort of be one of the guys in that group. That becomes a pretty hard thing to sell sometimes. And so there is obviously a little bit, and this is the thing that, Georgia fans, if they want to be, fair, they have to consider here too, that there's a little bit of the portal stuff that the door swings both ways on, is that obviously if you're Georgia, you do have to have a mechanism for getting guys out of the program, pushing them onto the NFL, in some cases allowing them to transfer and go other places, not standing in their way from doing that because, roster spots, I mean, it's the oldest cliche in the book is their spots are getting tight, but roster spots at a place like Georgia are obviously always at a premium. So I think you're right about that. Roddy Williams says, does any game worry you next year? I'm a little skittish of going to Tennessee late in the year. On paper, that's by far the toughest game in the regular season that Georgia plays on paper. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Ole Miss could be something, but as you point out, that's a home game. This is a road game. Here's the one thing I'll say about Tennessee is I don't necessarily believe that Tennessee is going to take that next step from being a good team, which they were this year, 10-2, to being a great team, the kind of team that can go 11-1 and be a true legitimate playoff contender. I'm not quite so sure if they take that step or they're capable of taking that step given the current roster that they have. But do I believe that Josh Heupel is the real deal when it comes to an offense that works? And whether it's Joe Milton as a starting quarterback this year or a freshman like Nico Imaliva as a starting quarterback this year, do I think that the Vols offense will probably still be pretty good? My guess is it probably still will be. That the one thing that for sure when you play at Tennessee next year is they will probably have a very good offense. So that was a system that could thrive, whether it was Milton or Hooker. Hooker just ended up being the guy that really benefited from most of that. But I don't imagine Tennessee takes a huge step back offensively with a guy like Milton, at least at the beginning of the season. Maybe it's Imaliva after that. But I don't think the Tennessee offense probably takes a huge step back just because the quarterback changed. So from that standpoint, it's the kind of tough regular season game that'll matter. And I guess if you're a Georgia fan, one of the questions you might have is, well, how tested and ready will Georgia be for a game like that, given the fact they're going to be an enormous favorite in every game they play prior to that? I don't know. Let's see what else. David Wayne Carroll asking about defensive leadership. It's a good question. I mean, obviously, you've got two very good inside linebackers that you feel really, really good about. I'd say that Malachi Starks, that was a guy, you're talking about overwhelmed. How overwhelmed must Malachi have been this year playing as much as he did? But listen to Malachi talk, man. That's a sharp guy. So now he's second-year player. I'm guessing that Malachi takes on more of a mantle of leadership here this year. Another guy that I feel the same way about, he just kind of has the sound of a team captain when he speaks, is a guy like Jalen Walker. That's a guy whose leadership credentials I kind of believe in. Beyond that, we'll see. But some of those young guys, now a year older, are guys that I think I feel pretty good about. All right, let's see what else. Ryan Walker had a comment I wanted to read. No, I can't find it. Let's see if I can find that. I don't see it right now, but I'll try to read that. Let me take another trip in the comment section. We'll go. JC says, well, what about MJ Sherman going to Nebraska? Is that a rumor that's true? I believe that's official. Sherman's going to Nebraska. I think that's a good get for them. I think it'll be a good place for him. But I believe that's official now. Jack Marine on the subject of the Bucks firing their offensive coordinator, Byron Leftwich, out. Yeah, we talked about that a little earlier. A couple of the NFL.com reporters mentioning Todd Monken as a factor there. Frank Patterson mentioned the South Carolina game week 3. Yeah, I wonder about South Carolina. That's an interesting one. Spencer Clark mentioning Sam Mpemba playing early. It's an interesting name. I guess I would probably favor Wilson more so than that, but you may be right. I think I'd probably favor Wilson, but I think one of the things you kind of imagine happening this offseason is a guy like Marvin Jones Jr. is going to probably spend a good bit of time trying to heal up on that shoulder injury that he's been dealing with. That could be your guy right there. If a fully healthy Jones next year kind of takes that big step as a pass rusher, that when you're thinking about inserting a name that you didn't really have a ton this year, Jones played some, but I do believe he's pretty banged up. That's a guy who may this is just me speculating, he may miss spring practice or something like that, really heal up, and he may come in and just be a real game wrecker for you next year. All right, we got to go. Good stuff. Stick D's asking about Todd Monken. Yeah, we're going to follow it. I mean, it's a rumor the NFL folks are taking seriously. Now, what does that mean beyond that? I don't know, but it's now been a thing that at least 3 different respected NFL reporters have mentioned as a possibility. So it should be on your radar. It should be for sure. So we'll figure it out from there after that. All right, we're going to go for now. Thanks for being here as a part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Y'all find R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price is promised. They can get your heating system tuned back up to factory fresh specs. It just costs $99. You can find them online at rsandrews.com for more on that. Also, our friends at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I mentioned earlier in the show that when it comes to the very serious stuff that could be going on in the months to come as it relates to the aftermath of, obviously, the terribly tragic accident that we have been talking about and trying to make sense of, there are certain elements of that that's just probably not quite in the boundaries of what we do here on the show. But our friends at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution will cover this because it is news, and I think that understanding how the law works in situations like this is probably pretty important. So the AJC will have coverage, and as well as DawgNation, of what happens today, and then throughout the time, the AJC is going to have plenty of coverage for you on that. So y'all check that out online, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, AJC.com. And then we'll see you back here tomorrow on 9:45 for our First and 15 on DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app, 10 a.m. after that across all video platforms. For DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp, we'll look forward to talking to you then.